Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members of the House, for your indulgence in allowing this resolution to be read this morning in your chambers as the Senate honors our former Senate Majority Leader. Very much appreciate your relaxing your rules so that we may do this efficiently and with the fitting decorum that is deserving of this occasion. I am proud to be a sponsor of this resolution, or this memorial rather, and to honor the memory of a man I knew for many years, Senator Ken Gordon. Senator Gordon was many things to many people. He was a friend, a teacher, a lawyer, an inspiration. He was an ethical man, a principled politician, a progressive champion, and a decent person. He cared deeply about the Colorado General Assembly and its rules and its traditions, and about ensuring that its integrity and legitimacy were preserved against the corrosive influences of money, apathy, and temptation. Now, Senator Gordon could also be a bit of a curmudgeon at times. He could be short. He was sometimes distracted by his smartphone. And he did not suffer fools very well. He did his homework, and he expected the same of those he interacted with in his role as a state legislator. I first met Ken Gordon in 1992. He was campaigning for the State House at the time, and I was campaigning against a ballot initiative. He had many issues that he championed. I, that year, had only one or two. Our paths crossed many times that year, and they crisscrossed over and over again for the remainder of his life. I didn't exactly follow in his footsteps, but I somehow ended up in his seat, his state Senate seat, that is. Now, as you know, Ken won his election in 1992, and he kept winning elections thereafter. He was an amazing campaigner. He loved to knock on doors, and he once walked the length of the state to draw attention to the Referendum C campaign. He served his whole 8 years here in the House and then 8 full years after that in the Senate. And during that time, he sponsored and passed numerous pieces of legislation, many of which I'm sure we'll hear about this morning. He also became a master of the rules. He learned to use the rules first as a member of the minority party here in the House, and then as the House Minority Leader, and later as the Senate Majority Leader. All of his 8 years in the House were served in the minority party, and so were 2 of his 8 years in the Senate. And his mastery for the rules and his respect for the institution of the legislature were gained from having looked at the legislature from both sides now. His inherent sense of fairness and integrity were reinforced by his experience in these differing roles, majority party, minority party. I will always remember the disappointment and the outrage Senator Gordon felt at the so-called midnight gerrymander in 2003. This episode infuriated him and taught him important lessons that he demonstrated throughout his tenure as Senate Majority Leader, a role he took on after the very next general election. He often told the story of how he inquired about rumors that a redistricting bill would be introduced in the last 3 days of the legislative session, and how he was told that whatever happened would comply with the rules of the Senate. When the bill was introduced on Monday and ran through in the 3 days, the last 3 days of session by suspending certain provisions of the Senate rules, he confronted the Senate president about complying with the rules, and he was told, quote, The Senate rules contain a provision for suspending the Senate rules. Or at least, that's how Ken Gordon told the story. And he told this story often, not to chide or shame the senators involved in that fateful episode from our not-too-distant history, but rather, he told the story to illustrate a broader, more important point. Abuse of the rules does not show strength, it shows weakness. Ken Gordon was a brutally honest man. He'd tell you so. He didn't believe in trickery or subterfuge. If he was with you, he was with you. And if he wasn't, he told you so. He respected the rules, and he adhered to the rules, sometimes to the frustration of his caucus or his colleagues. He used the rules to his advantage, and he'd let you know how he was going to do it. But he wouldn't misuse the rules or disrespect the process or his adversaries. He had too much respect for both. I'm not going to detail Senator Gordon's accomplishments during his tenure in the legislature. In the text of the joint memorial, we listed some of the broad topics that he addressed in the bills that he sponsored and the laws he helped pass. But what's clear from his body of work is that Ken Gordon cared about Colorado. He cared about the people, he cared about the government, he cared about our environment. I should also add that he cared about justice, civil liberties, due process, fairness, and the rule of law. He believed very much in what we do here under this gold dome and how it impacted the lives of everyone in our state. In 2006, Ken ran an unsuccessful campaign for Secretary of State, motivated in part because he would have been damn good at it, but mostly because of his passionate belief that the greatest threat to our democracy is the process by which we elect our leaders in expensive, divisive campaigns fueled by special interest money and often designed not to lift up one candidate or their ideals, but rather to tear others down. He founded the organization Clean Slate Now to promote his belief that we should reject the corrupting influence of big money in politics. Now, Ken liked to tell stories. He liked to tell stories to illustrate his points, especially in his written communications. Many of you were probably on his email list and can appreciate what I'm saying. Often his points weren't revealed until after a lengthy story, or at least lengthy for being an email missive. Sometimes the stories were funny or sad, and sometimes the moral of the story wasn't always immediately clear. But this was his way of engaging his audience and making them feel the point he wanted to make. I'm sure many of you remember fondly his emails and his stories, because I know I'm not the only one here that was on his email list. Many of you were on it too. It's my hope today, by telling stories about Ken Gordon, we not only honor his memory and his service to the people of Colorado, but that we also learn from his example. The story of Ken Gordon's respect for the rules and the integrity of the process is told not to make you impressed by who he was, but rather to make you inspired to be the ethical, principled, and fair role model that he rightly should be for all of those who are seated in either of our chambers. It's an honor to follow in his footsteps and to honor the man that Ken Gordon was. And I thank you all very much for your attention this morning and for listening to my Ken Gordon stories. I look forward to hearing your Ken Gordon stories. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Steadman.